Good afternoon, everyone. First, I just want to say thank you to Life107 for inviting me to be here today. What you're doing, creating space for healing, restoration, hope, all of those things, it matters more than most people will ever fully understand. My name is Angela Bradley, and I'm a survivor. And my story includes ongoing childhood abuse and exploitation that began at a very young age and eventually led to trafficking by the time I was 10 years old. I'm a little nervous. I'm not a professional speaker, so I'm trying to do this with my notes. So give me a little grace, please. In 2024, I self-published a book called He Changed My Name, where I share my journey from hopelessness to victory in Jesus. Today, my heart is very simple. I want to help bring awareness to something that often feels far away and bring it a little closer to home so that maybe, just maybe, another child doesn't have to walk the road I did. For me, this didn't start the way people think it does. There was no dramatic moment, no obvious red flags at first. It started small with some attention, with what felt kindness, what felt like a friend or someone to pay attention. I was young, around 4 or 5 years old, very alone, and something as a simple reward, a candy bar, became connected to something I just really didn't understand. And because I was a kid with severe ADHD, that candy bar felt like a big deal to me. It wasn't something I normally got, so it felt special. Nobody in their right mind would have given me sugar because it would have just made me more hyper. So that reward made it much easier for me to accept what he would do to me. As a child, I really didn't question things like other kids may have. At first, with abuse, there were moments where I felt very uncomfortable, but I grew up in an environment where instability was normal. And my mom, in her struggles with severe mental health, she had schizophrenia, she had bipolar, she had multiple personality issues, she had addiction, she was on many different drugs. So very little surprised me, and I spent a lot of my life feeling uncomfortable. I learned early on to just go with the flow, to adapt to whatever situation I was in. I bounced around a lot with family members, with foster homes, just people. I became really good at making the best out of whatever was in front of me. You know, the saying about making lemonade out of lemons, I did that. Even when it meant I would be hurt or used. I didn't have boundaries. I didn't feel protected. I didn't feel seen. And I felt very empty, alone, unseen. And when kids feel that way, they don't always recognize danger. They tend to just recognize attention. I went from being a very innocent child to being a very violated child by multiple perpetrators. I believe that's a spiritual thing, demonic, evil. And I believe when that happens to a child, that spirit is lingering. And that's what perpetrators kind of can see or feel, or they kind of can sense those things when the child isn't whole. And I believe that that's why it happens multiple, because for me, it happened by many different people. As a kid, you know, between 5 and maybe 8 years old. And I think they noticed I didn't have boundaries. They noticed I didn't have anybody checking in on me. So, as I said, we as kids who are going through that tend to recognize attention and not always danger. And I went from being violated by multiple perpetrators to being used for childhood or child pornography. And then by the time I was 10, I was introduced to street prostitution. And because of this grooming that took place, in my mind, there was really no difference between a candy and $100. He or them. Either way, I had become used to being used and taught that if I got something out of it, I won. One of the biggest misconceptions about trafficking is that it only happens out there or in the hood or in the city or with strangers. But the truth is, it often starts in very familiar places, in homes with trusted relationships, in environments where no one is looking for it. My childhood abuse began with someone who lived near my grandparents in what most people would consider a safe, suburban, middle-class neighborhood. My grandparents were my safe place from the chaos at home. But they didn't fully understand how severe things were for me or the impact of my mom's addiction and mental health struggles, that the impact that those were having on my life. And that's why I feel it's so important for us, not just organizations like Life107, but all of us to understand what it can actually look like. If I could say anything to caregivers, teachers, mentors, case managers who interact with vulnerable children, it would be this. Sorry, I'm in Texas, and Texas allergies are getting the best out of me. But it would be this: to pay attention to the small shifts. Sometimes it looks like a child becoming unusually quiet. Or for me, I became overly eager to please. Sometimes it's unexplained gifts or things they didn't have access to, such as candy or different toys or money. That's one thing that I've always questioned in my mind is, why didn't someone ask, where did you get that from? Where did that come from? Where have you been? What did you do? Just those questions. Another thing I would share with caregivers is that sometimes it's not rebellion. Sometimes it's the complete opposite: compliance. Children who feel unseen or unprotected don't always act out. Sometimes they adapt in ways that make them more vulnerable. Like I mentioned, I make the best out of every situation. And if I get something for it, I win. Most importantly, ask questions. If something doesn't feel right, ask, are you okay? If your gut says something's not right, ask, is there something wrong? My grandparents were truly amazing people, and I mean that, truly. However, they were naive and probably really stressed with my mom and all her issues, but the signs were there. They just didn't know them. They probably didn't want to ask some questions because of the backlash from my mom. So they became accustomed to not asking. But here's what I want you to hear more than anything. My story didn't end there. Healing is possible. Restoration is real. And God has a way of taking the most, and I'm getting teary-eyed because my story and my truth are truly the most broken parts of my life. And He turns them into something that can bring light to others. Since this process, I have been able to share and cry with so many other people and to give them hope that just because you might be on the street today, your tomorrow can change if you just allow Him to do it. So today I don't just carry my story, I carry purpose. And if sharing even a small part of my journey helps one person see differently, ask one more question, protect one child, then to me, what I went through, it's all worth it. My encouragement is don't assume it could never happen in your world. Be willing to see, be willing to ask, and be willing to listen, because awareness isn't just information, it's protection. And together, we really can help change someone's story. So if you're sitting here today wondering, what can I do? Supporting Life 107 or any of the other organizations in this fight is one of the most tangible, meaningful ways to make a difference, because what they're building here changes lives. I'm standing here today telling you this story and verbalizing it, talking it through. I wrote this book because somewhere along the way, someone cared. And today, you have the opportunity to be that person for someone else. I share more of my journey in my book. And something really special about it is every time someone purchases a book, it helps me put another copy into the hands of someone who may be in a shelter, in jail, experiencing homelessness, someone who needs hope. If you'd like to connect or have questions, or feel free to connect with me on Facebook. I have a Facebook page. It's called He Changed My Name. And once again, thank you, Life 107, for allowing me to share my heart and being such a strong partner in this fight. Thank you.